Picture two people on the same street, in the same city, living under the same economic headlines, complaining about the same prices, the same rent, the same crazy cost of living. One of them earns less than you would expect and somehow keeps getting calmer every year. Their savings grow. Their investments deepen. Their choices widen. The other person earns more than most people would call comfortable, yet lives with a low-grade panic that never fully leaves their body. They check their bank balance before opening certain emails. They delay looking at credit card statements until the morning feels less fragile. They tell themselves they are doing fine because technically, on paper, they are. But every month feels like a quiet emergency disguised as normal life. If you look closely, the difference between them is not talent, and it is not luck, and it is not even income in the way most people assume. It is one financial habit so ordinary and so socially approved that it hides in plain sight while it drains your future a little more every week. The habit is not dramatic. It does not look like addiction. It does not announce itself with flashing red lights. It does not require recklessness or stupidity. In fact, it often wears the clothes of responsibility. It shows up in small upgrades, harmless conveniences, recurring comforts, deserved treats, and purchases that each seem too minor to matter. It slips into your life through phrases that sound almost mature. It's just easier this way. I work hard, so why not? This isn't a big deal. I can afford the monthly payment. I'll cut back later. And because each decision arrives separately, you rarely experience the full weight of the pattern all at once. You only feel the result. You feel it as pressure, as tightness, as the strange humiliation of earning decent money and still not feeling safe. Most people think staying broke is caused by one big thing: a bad salary, a bad economy, a bad break, a terrible investment, a medical emergency. Those things absolutely matter. Some of them can devastate a life. But long before the crisis comes, long before the layoff or the recession or the unexpected bill, many people have already built a financial system so fragile that almost anything can knock it over. And they did not build it with obviously terrible decisions. They built it with a habit so common it barely looks like a choice at all. They built it by automatically converting extra income, emotional discomfort, and passing desire into a more expensive version of everyday life. That is the habit keeping you broke in plain sight, turning every increase in income, energy, stress, boredom, insecurity, and ambition into more consumption instead of more margin. Not necessarily luxury, not necessarily extravagance, just more. Slightly better phone, slightly nicer car, slightly more delivery, slightly more subscriptions, slightly more convenience, slightly more wardrobe, slightly more home, slightly more social spending, slightly more digital clutter, slightly more monthly obligation. This is how financial suffocation happens in respectable clothing. Not through one catastrophic decision, but through 1,000 unremarkable upgrades that slowly turn your income into maintenance. Maintenance is the word most people never think about. They think they are buying pleasure or status or efficiency or comfort, but what they are actually buying is maintenance. That bigger apartment is not just more space. It is more furniture to fill it, more rooms to clean, more bills to cover, more psychological pressure to make it worth it. That finance car is not just transportation. It is a payment schedule, insurance, registration, repairs, and a subtle emotional need to keep living like someone who owns that car. That premium lifestyle is not just enjoyment. It is a machine that now has to be fed every month, whether you feel rich or not. And once your life gets expensive enough, you stop working to build freedom. You start working to keep the machine alive. This is why so many people feel confused by their own finances. They look at their salary and think, I should be farther ahead by now. They are not wrong. They probably should be. But the missing money did not vanish. It was absorbed. Absorbed by systems. Absorbed by routines. Absorbed by the habit of relieving discomfort with spending and rewarding progress with higher fixed costs. You do not need to be reckless to get trapped. You only need to live in a culture that treats every form of self-regulation as deprivation and every form of spending as personal expression. If you want to understand the habit clearly, you have to stop looking at purchases as isolated events. That is where most financial advice fails. It asks, should you buy this, when the better question is, what pattern does this belong to? One restaurant meal means very little by itself. One impulsive order means very little. One convenience fee means very little. One upgraded service means very little. But a pattern is never made of one event. A pattern is made of repetition plus justification. Repetition makes it expensive. Justification makes it invisible. And once a habit becomes invisible, you stop auditing it. You stop resisting it. You start calling it your lifestyle. Lifestyle is one of the most dangerous words in personal finance because it sounds passive, almost natural, like weather. But your lifestyle is not weather. It is architecture. It is a system you either built on purpose or drifted into by default. It determines how much pressure sits on your income every month. It determines how many bad surprises you can survive. It determines whether a raise changes your future or merely funds a prettier cage. And once a lifestyle expands, it becomes emotionally defended. You no longer see your spending as optional. You see it as normal, necessary, reasonable, part of who you are now. This is where the psychology gets uncomfortable, because the habit is not really about money first. It is about regulation. Spending helps you regulate mood, identity, exhaustion, loneliness, envy, and boredom. It helps you convert an invisible emotional state into a visible action. You feel behind, so you upgrade. You feel stressed, so you order in. You feel unappreciated, so you buy something for yourself. You feel insecure, so you signal competence. You feel tired, so you pay for convenience. You feel like life has not rewarded you enough, so you reward yourself in advance. Then you wonder why your accounts never feel solid. But the money was never only serving financial goals. It was serving emotional ones. This is why the habit survives budgets. A budget can track numbers, but it cannot by itself confront the emotional function your spending performs. If buying things helps you feel relieved, capable, attractive, successful, modern, or in control, then cutting those purchases will feel like losing something much bigger than the object itself. It will feel like losing access to a coping mechanism. That is why people can understand personal finance perfectly and still repeat the same pattern for years. Information is not the problem. Self-deception is. More precisely, emotional self-deception dressed up as normal adult life. Let me show you how the habit grows. It usually starts when your income rises. You get a raise, a better job, a side income boost, a good month in business, or maybe you simply feel more financially optimistic than before. In theory, that moment should increase your margin. It should strengthen your savings. It should widen the distance between what comes in and what goes out. But for many people, the opposite happens. The higher income becomes permission. Permission to move somewhere nicer. Upgrade the car. Spend more on appearance. Add more subscriptions. Stop checking prices. Normalize delivery. Normalize premium versions. Normalize faster spending. The raise never becomes security. It becomes a lifestyle referendum. The truly destructive part is how reasonable each step feels. Nobody says, I want to sabotage my future. Nobody says, I want my retirement delayed by 10 years. Nobody says, I want to become emotionally dependent on my paycheck. They say, this is still within budget. This will make daily life easier. I deserve better now. I'm not even spending as much as other people. And maybe all of that is true in the moment. That is what makes the habit powerful. It rarely asks for a giant act of stupidity. It only asks for one more little yes. Over time, those little yeses accumulate into a life that looks successful from a distance and exhausting up close. The furniture matches. The wardrobe is current. The tech is polished. The apartment feels upgraded. The vacations photograph well. The social life looks active. But inside the numbers, there's barely any oxygen. Every month gets pre-assigned before it even begins. Every paycheck already has too many names on it. There is no room for pause. No room for uncertainty. No room for mistakes. This is what people mean when they say they make good money, but somehow still feel broke. They are not imagining it. They are experiencing the emotional reality of low margin. Margin is what rich-looking people often do not have. Margin is the gap between your income and your obligations. Is the breathing room between what life costs and what your labor produces. It is the difference between panic and patience when something goes wrong. Margin is what lets you think, is what lets you say no. It is what lets you endure a layoff, leave a bad relationship, recover from a bad quarter, take care of a parent, rest after burnout, invest during fear, and avoid selling your future every time life becomes inconvenient. If your spending habit is constantly shrinking your margin, then even a high income cannot make you feel safe for long. This is why the most dangerous financial habit is not overspending in the cartoonish sense. It is living in a way that makes your future entirely dependent on your continued ability to earn at your current pace. That is a very fragile form of success. It looks fine until your energy changes, until your job changes, until the economy changes, until your health changes, until your priorities change. If your lifestyle requires your current intensity forever, then your finances are built on a version of you that may not last. You can see the habit most clearly in categories people stop questioning: housing, transportation, food, convenience, digital spending, social comparison. These are the channels through which modern life quietly drains wealth. Not because all spending there is wrong, but because these categories are socially protected. They come wrapped in stories. A bigger place means progress. A newer car means reliability. Constant delivery means efficiency. Premium digital tools mean productivity. Being able to say yes socially means connection. And if all of that sounds healthy enough, then the habit remains untouched, even as it consumes the money you thought would one day buy your freedom. Housing is where the habit becomes physical. Once you increase your housing cost, you increase the temperature of your entire life. A more expensive place is not just a number. It changes the pressure beneath every other decision. Suddenly, you need your income more. You tolerate work you dislike more. You need more from each month just to remain still. You tell yourself the place is worth it because it is beautiful or better located or more aligned with who you are becoming. Maybe it is. But if it weakens your savings, delays your investing, and reduces your resilience, then it is not only shelter. It is a claim on your future labor. Transportation works the same way, but more seductively. Cars carry identity. They let you feel upgraded in public. They make the ordinary act of going somewhere feel like evidence that your life is moving upward. That is why people will defend a payment long after it stopped making financial sense. The car is no longer just a vehicle. It is self-concept on wheels. But numbers do not care about symbolism. If your transportation costs are absorbing cash flow that could have built a 6-month emergency fund, invested for decades, or reduced your dependence on work, then that car is not only taking you places, it is taking options away from you. Food is another place where the habit hides behind innocence. After all, everyone has to eat. But modern food spending is rarely just about nourishment. It is about fatigue management, emotional relief, speed, reward, and convenience disguised as necessity. The occasional convenience is not the issue. The issue is when your daily emotional state keeps outsourcing effort to spending. Too tired to cook. Too stressed to plan. Too overwhelmed to shop intentionally. Too depleted to care. That pattern does not just increase your food bill. It trains your brain to associate money with rescue. And once money becomes rescue, restraint starts to feel like abandonment. Then there is digital spending, the most frictionless category of all. Streaming apps, memberships, software, subscriptions, premium versions, creator support, storage upgrades, small, recurring charges you barely feel individually. They slip under your awareness because none of them are dramatic. But recurring spending is powerful precisely because it becomes background. It no longer asks for a decision. It only asks for continuation. And continuation is easy when your attention is fragmented and your life already feels full. People will cut one large expense faster than they will confront 20 small recurring ones, even when the recurring ones reveal more about the habit that keeps them financially weak. Social spending may be the most emotionally loaded category because it touches belonging. Few things are harder than admitting that your financial habits are partially driven by the fear of looking limited in front of other people. It is easier to call it living or generosity, or staying connected, or making memories. And sometimes it is. But sometimes it is performance. Sometimes it is fear wearing a smile. Fear of appearing behind. Fear of seeming cheap. Fear of being the person who always says no. Fear of feeling ordinary when everyone else appears to be accelerating. Social pressure does not have to be explicit to be expensive. It only has to be ambient. Ambient pressure is what defines modern financial life. You are surrounded by visual evidence of consumption all day long. Better kitchens, better trips, better bodies, better clothes, better gadgets, better routines, better aesthetics, better lifestyles presented as casual. The dangerous part is not envy itself. The dangerous part is normalization. Once a higher cost life becomes visually normal, your current life starts to feel like a problem to solve. And if that feeling remains unexamined, you will try to solve it with spending. Not because you are shallow, but because the human mind is highly vulnerable to repeated standards. This is why comparison is not just emotional. It is financial. You are not only comparing happiness or beauty or status. You are comparing spending thresholds. You are adjusting what feels reasonable. You are recalibrating your sense of enough. And once enough keeps moving upward, wealth becomes mathematically difficult no matter how hard you work. Because wealth does not grow from earnings alone. It grows from the gap between what you could spend and what you choose not to. If comparison keeps narrowing that gap, then your future will stay weak even while your income rises. At the center of all this is a powerful lie, that comfort is the same thing as security. It is not. Comfort is how your life feels in the short term. Security is how your life survives the long term. You can buy comfort quickly. Security takes time. You can buy comfort with debt. Security does not respond to appearances. You can make your life feel smoother this month while making your future more brittle for years. That is the trade people keep making without naming it. They trade resilience for relief, optionality for aesthetics, peace later for convenience now. Optionality is one of the clearest ways to measure whether the habit is controlling you. Can you leave a bad job? Can you take time off if your mind or body starts failing? Can you survive several months without income? Can you absorb a major repair, a family crisis, a relocation, a legal issue, a health interruption? Can you invest when markets are falling instead of scrambling for liquidity? Can you decline work that pays well but costs you too much internally? If the answer to most of these questions is no, then your problem may not be low income. Your problem may be a lifestyle structure that quietly consumed your freedom. People often imagine freedom as something dramatic and cinematic. Quitting a job, buying a house in cash, retiring early. But real financial freedom begins much earlier and much quieter. It begins when a surprise does not ruin your month. It begins when you do not dread every bill. It begins when your next decision is not forced by urgency. It begins when you can pause before saying yes. It begins when you stop needing your income to perform perfection every month just to keep your life upright. The habit keeping you broke in plain sight steals that freedom first, then convinces you the problem is simply that you need to earn more. Earning more can help. Sometimes it helps enormously. But if the habit remains untouched, higher income often only scales the pattern. You do not become financially stronger. You become more expensive. Your tastes rise. Your baseline rises. Your standards rise. Your excuses become more sophisticated. You call your spending intentional because you can technically cover it. But covering a cost is not the same as neutralizing its consequences. You may be able to afford the purchase and still be unable to afford what it does to your margin, your flexibility, and your long-term compounding. Compounding is where the habit becomes truly tragic. Most people understand compounding as something that happens in investments. Fewer people understand that spending habits compound too. A single financial habit repeated for years becomes a life architecture. It affects how much you save, how much you invest, how much stress you carry, how much risk you can tolerate, what jobs you accept, how you behave in downturns, how quickly you recover from setbacks, and whether your future gets stronger or more dependent over time. You are not just spending money. You are rehearsing a financial identity. Financial identities matter because they create self-fulfilling patterns. If you live like someone who is always entitled to the next upgrade, you will build a system that constantly needs more. If you live like someone who protects margin, values optionality, and treats income increases as a chance to expand resilience, then your life begins to organize itself differently. Your spending changes. Your anxiety changes. Your decisions change. Your threshold for what feels normal changes. Eventually, your bank account starts telling a different story, not because you transformed overnight, but because you stopped feeding the habit that made stability impossible. So what does that change actually look like? It starts with one brutally honest realization. Your problem is probably not that life is expensive in some abstract sense. Your problem is that too many of your expenses were accepted without being interrogated. They entered your life through mood, momentum, and social imitation, and then hardened into identity. To reverse that, you have to bring consciousness back into the system. Not punishment, not performative minimalism, not self-hatred. Consciousness. You need to see what your money is actually doing for you, what it is compensating for, and what it is quietly costing you beyond the receipt. Start with your recurring costs, because recurring costs reveal your real loyalties. One-time purchases can lie. Recurring charges tell the truth. They tell you what kind of life you have normalized. They tell you what comforts you refuse to lose, what identities you keep funding, what conveniences your nervous system has become dependent on. Print them if you have to. Look at them in one place. Do not merely categorize them by amount. Categorize them by function. Which ones create genuine value? Which ones by image? Which ones by avoidance? Which ones by speed because your days are too chaotic? Which ones by relief because your mind feels overloaded? Which ones are just inertia pretending to be preference? Then examine your raises, bonuses, and income jumps from the last few years. What did they build? Did they build liquidity? Did they build investment momentum? Did they build freedom? Or did they mostly build a costlier version of normal life? This question stings because it exposes whether your progress translated into strength or just upgraded maintenance. Many people discover that every increase in earnings disappeared into things they can no longer imagine giving up. That is how the habit protects itself. It turns temporary desires into permanent standards. Next, look at the moments you spend most impulsively. Not the categories. The moments. End of the workday. Weekends. After conflict. After achievement. During loneliness. During boredom. During fatigue. During scrolling. During comparison. You are not just looking for where money goes. You are looking for when your resistance drops. That is where the habit lives. A financial pattern is usually anchored to an emotional state. If you can identify the state, you can interrupt the pattern. Until then, you will keep trying to solve a behavioral problem with numerical discipline alone. One of the strongest interventions is to create time between urge and action. Time sounds simple, but it changes the chemistry of spending. Many purchases survive because they happen before the emotional wave passes. If you delay the purchase by a day, sometimes even by an hour, the story weakens. The urgency fades. The imagined improvement loses color. You remember what else the money could do. You return to yourself. This is not just about impulse control. It is about reclaiming authorship. The habit keeping you broke thrives on speed. Margin grows in slowness. Another intervention is to redefine what income increases mean. Most people treat a raise as a reward. Financially stronger people treat it as leverage. The moment income rises, decide in advance where the first percentage will go. Savings, debt reduction, investments, emergency reserves. Anything that expands stability before lifestyle expands. If you do not assign the raise, your environment will. Your ads will. Your comparisons will. Your fatigue will. Your old habit will. Extra income without a plan becomes prey. You also need a more mature definition of enough. This is where many high earners fail because they never establish a finish line. Better remains a moving target forever. Better apartment. Better neighborhood. Better kitchen. Better wardrobe, better technology, better travel, better routines, better experiences. Better becomes a religion with no Sabbath. And if there is no enough, then there is no arrival. Only a life of endless financial acceleration masquerading as ambition. Defining enough is not a lack of ambition. It is the foundation of peace. Peace is something people underestimate in financial discussions because it is hard to post and impossible to fake for long. But peace is one of the clearest signs that your money is serving you properly. Peace is opening your banking app without dread. Peace is not needing every month to go perfectly. Peace is making decisions with a long horizon instead of reacting to every fluctuation. Peace is knowing that an inconvenience remains an inconvenience and does not become a crisis. The habit keeping you broke in plain sight steals peace long before it steals solvency. What makes this habit especially cruel is that society often rewards it visually. The financially fragile person may look more successful than the financially stable one. Better apartment, better car, better aesthetics, better visible life. Meanwhile, the person building real security may look almost boring from the outside. They repeat clothes. They drive something ordinary. They live below what others assume they could afford. They leave social room for money to accumulate quietly. This is one reason the wrong habit spreads so easily. It offers immediate visible feedback, while the better habit offers delayed, invisible strength. Delayed, invisible strength is difficult for the ego. It requires trusting what cannot yet be seen. It requires letting your bank account improve before your image does. It requires absorbing the discomfort of not performing financial progress outwardly while building it inwardly. And that is exactly why so few people do it consistently. The world notices spending before it notices restraint. It notices upgrades before it notices liquidity. It notices aesthetics before it notices optionality. But your future will not be funded by what other people noticed. It will be funded by what you quietly protected. If you want a different financial life, you do not need a different personality. You need a different relationship with relief. You need to stop using spending as the default bridge between discomfort and reward. You need to develop other ways of regulating your state that do not invoice your future. Rest that is not purchased. Pleasure that is not financed. Identity that is not displayed through upgrades. Self-respect that does not require external proof. This is deeper work than budgeting, but it is also more powerful because it attacks the habit where it actually begins. The truth is that money problems are often behavior problems, and behavior problems are often emotional problems in disguise. This does not mean every financial struggle is self-created. Many are not. Life can be unfair in ways no amount of discipline can fully neutralize. But within the territory you can influence, emotional spending patterns, automatic lifestyle inflation, and unexamined convenience can quietly do as much damage as the external forces people love to blame. The most empowering realization is not that everything is your fault. Is that more is under your control than your old habits wanted you to believe. Imagine what happens if you break the pattern for 1 year. Not with extreme deprivation, but with clarity. You stop letting every mood become a purchase. You stop letting every raise become a reward. You stop calling convenience a necessity every time you feel tired. You stop funding identities you do not actually need. You keep more than before. You invest earlier than before. Your cash buffer deepens. Your mind relaxes. You begin to trust yourself. And something surprising happens. The need to spend often weakens as your financial strength grows. Security starts to do emotionally what shopping used to do temporarily. That is the virtuous cycle most people never experience long enough to believe in. Spending less with intention creates margin. Margin creates safety. Safety reduces emotional urgency. Reduced urgency lowers the impulse to spend for relief. Lower impulse spending creates even more margin. Over time, your life feels less dramatic, but far more powerful. You stop needing constant evidence that you are doing well because your structure starts proving it privately. This is what wealth often feels like long before it looks like anything. The opposite cycle is what traps so many people. Stress triggers spending. Spending weakens margin. Weak margin creates more stress. More stress increases the need for reward, convenience, relief, and symbolic progress. The cycle continues until a shock interrupts it. Debt becomes unmanageable, savings run dry, a job disappears, a relationship ends, a health issue arrives, or simple exhaustion makes the whole performance impossible to maintain. Waiting for the shock is expensive, not only financially but psychologically, because by then, change feels less like choice and more like humiliation. You do not need to wait for humiliation. You can interrupt the pattern while your life still looks fine from the outside. In fact, that is the best time to do it because you still have room to move before circumstances start deciding for you. Ask yourself one question that cuts deeper than most budgeting tools ever will. What am I repeatedly spending money to feel? More in control, more admired, less tired, less behind, more modern, more rewarded, more hopeful, more connected? Once you answer that honestly, the habit becomes easier to see, and anything clearly seen becomes harder to obey blindly. The financial habit keeping you broke in plain sight is not just spending too much. It is using money to continuously support a life structure that your future cannot comfortably carry. Is letting desire become obligation. Is letting convenience become dependency. Is letting image become overhead. Is letting every emotional wave leave a financial footprint. That is why the damage feels so mysterious when you first notice it. Because each decision looked harmless. Only the pattern was dangerous. And patterns are invisible until you step back far enough to see the shape of your own life. So step back now. Look at your life not as a collection of purchases, but as a machine. What does this machine require from you every month? How much of your energy does it consume? How many hours of labor does it demand before you even begin building tomorrow? How many of your expenses produce actual meaning, and how many merely preserve a version of yourself you no longer need? If this machine lost 20% of its fuel, would it wobble or collapse? The answers to those questions are more honest than any income number you can quote. Real financial progress begins the moment you stop asking, "Can I afford this?" and start asking, "What kind of life does this create?" Because affordability is temporary. Structure is lasting. A purchase can fit your paycheck and still damage your future. A lifestyle can look polished and still be fundamentally weak. A person can appear comfortable and still be one disruption away from panic. The goal is not to look like someone who has money. The goal is to build a life that does not constantly consume it. If you can learn that while your income is still coming in, while your habits are still adjustable, while your future is still highly shapeable, then you can change the entire direction of your financial life. Not because you discovered a trick, but because you stopped ignoring the obvious pattern hiding in front of you. You stopped feeding the habit that kept turning labor into maintenance instead of freedom. You stopped confusing upgrades with security. You stopped paying to feel okay every time life pressed on you. And in that space, maybe for the first time in years, your money begins to stay. The world will keep offering you new ways to spend your stress, your fatigue, your loneliness, your ambition, your envy, and your boredom. It will call this convenience reward, self-expression, success, balance, and living well. Sometimes maybe it is. But if it keeps leaving you dependent, anxious, and financially thin no matter how hard you work, then it is not improving your life. It is renting your future back to you 1 month at a time. And the moment you see that clearly, the habit loses some of its power. Because what keeps people broke in plain sight is not only the spending itself. It is the failure to recognize that they have been quietly trading freedom for relief all along.